So we're going to begin this round of learning by hearing from Rabbi Mike Uram, who is the Chief Vision and Education Officer for Pardes North America. And before that, he served as the Executive Director and Campus Rabbi at Penn Hillel for over 16 years. He's going to be joined by Rabbi Shani Gross from Pardes. So take it away, Rabbi Uram.
Great. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. It's great to see a few faces. And I'm so excited to welcome Rabbi Shani Gross to join me for this conversation. Right now, one of the things that we are both working on is launching something called Pardes North America. For about 50 years, almost 50 years, Pardes has been saying that the Torah is for everyone and trying to create the most inspirational and accessible Torah learning experiences imaginable. And now it's doubling down on that promise by bringing Pardes to North America, not just in terms of recruitment, but also really in terms of being a major outlet of Jewish education. And Rabbi Shani Gross is the director of educational programming for Pardes North America. So we're excited to have her. And we're going to be in conversation together. And the topic, which is a little bit provocative, is the new Jewish body, Jewish power resurrected. And we're really going to play with this. We're going to play with notions of gender, of stereotypical notions of masculinity and femininity, and how it becomes more fluid even in rabbinic Judaism. We're going to play with how anti-Semitism fueled certain kind of notions of gender inversion, seeing Jewish men as not real men and seeing Jewish women as much more masculine than they really were. And we're also going to play with some of the discomfort that Jews feel around power and questions about how do Jews feel like they have power. Is it through intellect and cleverness and wisdom, or is it through physicality and a body? We're going to play a lot with some of the Zionist forms of Jewish self-hatred that existed, really the kind of disgust that some of the Zionist thinkers felt about diaspora Jews. And in some ways, one of the thinkers that we're going to look at in particular, in some ways, he is this prophetic voice that predicts a kind of Israeli society and a relationship with the Jewish body that is very true. And in other ways, really, I think, enters us into something that can be kind of darker and more destructive to some of the things that we're trying to do in contemporary society. So we're going to have fun for about 25 minutes, and we'll try to focus at least on two of the texts, because there are many more in the packet. So can I ask whoever is kind of emceeing this to bring up the slides and to share them with everyone? And we want to be on the second page, the first set of textual slides, which is the second page. Perfect. So Shani, I'm going to turn it over to you. Why don't you start by reading this for us? This is a piece of Gemara from Bava Metzia, and then we'll get into it.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I'm told you're here, even though I don't see all of you. So nice to know that you're out there somewhere in the ether. And just before I read, just something interesting to note is that this story comes within the context of talking about Rabbi Yochanan's physical beauty. And so with that, we are told, one day Rabbi Yochanan was bathing in the Jordan when Reish Lakish saw him and leapt into the Jordan after him. Said Rabbi Yochanan to Reish Lakish, "Your strength should be for Torah." To which Reish Lakish replied, "Your beauty should be for women."
Wait, so Shani, can I just,
yeah,
let's put this into plain English, because already there's like the he's and hims.
Mm-hmm.
It's an amazing image, right? So Rabbi Yochanan is bathing in the Jordan River, and Reish Lakish seems to stumble upon him. And what's this whole, like, why is he leaping into the Jordan River?
So it's a great question. It would seem to be that Reish Lakish, who also for context is sort of this master robber, his name even in denotes that he's sort of this not the best guy. And he sees Rabbi Yochanan, and presumably he thinks he's this beautiful woman. And so he jumps into the river to do something
Engage towards a Torah study, perhaps, or
perhaps
maybe
not Torah study, that's for sure. And Rabbi Yochanan turns around and says, you know, you're wasting yourself. You should spend your life learning Torah. For whatever reason, Rabbi Yochanan sees something in Reish Lakish. And it's interesting. He almost sees this strength, and he says, like, this physical strength should be for something besides what you're doing, for something spiritual.
Yeah. So interesting. So already the gender roles are super interesting here, right? So Rabbi Yochanan is this objectified, beautiful, object in Reish Lakish's mind. It's like creepy and stalkerish. The way, I mean, there's not a sense of gentle approach. There doesn't seem to be any physical contact. Reish Lakish does not seem like a kind of character who's looking for a ton of consent. He is pursuing this beautiful object aggressively. And also this notion of like maybe Rabbi Yochanan's even androgynous in some ways at this point, but Reish Lakish is this maybe stereotypical physical specimen where his masculinity, his power is through his physical brawn. Does that seem right? Is that what you're reading also? That
seems right. And also within the context of what's going on the Talmudic page, actually, there's a whole conversation around Rabbi Yochanan's beauty. And he acknowledges he's a descendant of Joseph, who is one of the only male characters whose physical beauty is described in the similar ways as women are described, who are beautiful. And he's also, there's a whole conversation around, well, what exactly does it mean that he's beautiful? And they say he's not a traditional beautiful because he didn't have a beard. So his physical appearance was very much androgynous, it seems like, and very not typical for sort of the male masculine beauty. And there's sort of a interesting mutual appreciation that Reish Lakish seems to have for Rabbi Yochanan's beauty, and Rabbi Yochanan seems to have for Reish Lakish's brawn, we might say.
Amazing. Okay, great. So keep going in the text.
All right. So after Rabbi Yochanan says this to Reish Lakish, your strength should be for Torah, Reish Lakish says to him, your beauty should be for women. To which Rabbi Yochanan says, if you will repent, I will give you, Reish Lakish, my sister in marriage, who is more beautiful than I.
Okay. So that seems to be like a common thing that happens. You meet someone in a river and immediately offer your sister in marriage.
Yeah.
So how do you respond? Like if you were sitting with a group of younger folks and you were trying to inspire them about the wisdom encapsulated in our Torah tradition, and you see something like this, which seems like so kind of misogynistic and tokenizing of women, just out of step with the kind of contemporary reality, like how do you deal, especially as like an Orthodox female rabbi, like how do you treat something like this when you see it in the text?
Well, that's a heavy-handed question. I think that I would say that this is an objectifying text. This is, we're sort of right. Rabbi Yochanan gets objectified, and his reaction is, "Let me just objectify we'll move this object from me to my sister," and the prize for Rabbi Yochanan is Reish Lakish's strength. And so, how do I get that strength? You want my beauty? Let me just give you my sister, no problem. I want to, right? So the sister, the woman remains as the object. The beauty is my sister. But the focus, the prize is Reish Lakish, which is, again, it's sort of a very interesting, what's the word? You think about birds sort of in a mating dance. This is like a very bizarre mating dance.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the whole interplay is beauty, it's beauty and Torah, and on the and piety and righteousness, and on the other side is physicality, masculinity, sin, right? I mean, the tshuva piece here, ignorance. So there's a deep transaction. It's true. It's like the Reish Lakish is trying to acquire some like physical object, and actually what Rabbi Yochanan is trying to do is acquire a student, right? And to fix someone, to force them into repentance. So there's a lot going on here. And again, I think part of the play here is we're not submitting to the text and saying, well, if this is a value that's in the text that you could trade a sister for someone else, that's now a Jewish value. That part of our ability in relating to these texts is to pick them apart and not to just submit to whatever value is here, but to use it even to rebuff the text. Okay, take us home to the end of this piece of Gemara.
All right. Reish Lakish undertook to repent. Then he wished to return and collect his weapons, but could not. So he's in the river, just for a little more context, he's in the river. He decides, I'm going to listen to Rabbi Yochanan. I'm going to redirect my life for Torah purposes. And suddenly his strength leaves him. Yeah. And he can't go back. And we spoke about this. I think, Mike, you said something about right, this sort of being in the middle of the river, being sort of a crossroads between an old life and a future life. And what does it mean to sort of leave behind that life?
I'm so glad you reminded me of it. I totally forgot as we were preparing that we discussed this, but it's also Dafka, the Jordan River, right? This is the transition moment between Bnei Yisrael and the wandering in the desert becoming Am Yisrael. It's the transition between Moshe's leadership and Yehoshua's leadership. So it's interesting that the kind of literary elements of the Gemara here pick Dafka, the Jordan River, for this exchange to happen. But I also think there's something here about collecting his weapons that for me, it adds another dimension of what went on. It's not just that Reish Lakish dove into the river after this beautiful woman, but now you can, again, I may be going a little bit further than the plain meaning of the text, but there's something there that's almost like he undressed, right? Almost in my imagination, it's not just that he took off his sword and his shield, but maybe his armor. So it gives another glimpse into just how creepy and abusive this encounter was. But it's fascinating, right? What is it that all of a sudden he can't pick his weapons up, right? Rabbi Harris, who is a professor of mine at JTS, used to say that there's delightful ambiguity in the text. So we know something changes in Reish Lakish after he starts learning Torah. But all the Gemara tells us is that he can't return the same way. He can't pick up his weapons and get back across the river. So maybe do you just want to even paraphrase? I think Rashi comes here to give us an answer and full transparency. The English here is already a good interpretation of the Rashi. I was trying to make it easy for someone just reading the English to understand what the import was. But do you want to just bring us that, Shani, as well?
Sure. So Rashi says, "Nekfotz kvar rishona demeshekabel alav olma Torah tashash kocho." So essentially, his ability to jump the way he had jumped into the river, he loses that ability because his strength leaves him once he sort of takes on the weight of Ol Malchut Shamayim or the burden of sort of Torah. And it's interesting that. It's sort of, there's sort of a suggestion that maybe Reish Lakish didn't actually understand what he was taking on, right? He sort of, you would imagine if I'm making this life choice in this transition, what do I need my weapons for? And yet he actually wanted to get those back. And so you sort of feel like this person is struggling between these two decisions. And, we're not going to get to this, but the way the story continues to play out, weapons come back into the conversation, and you sort of feel like Reish Lakish is always struggling between the identity of what he was and what he becomes.
So Shani, I love that you just brought that in. There's such a profound lesson, I think, about our lives, that we live in this culture that by and large says, like, life you're always going uphill, you're always getting better, stronger, acquiring, and that's how you measure success, the more you have. But the truth is, the most important decisions and commitments we make in our lives actually say, like, if you're going to choose this, you're letting something else go. And that's such a beautiful read, that even though he may have been excited to jump into this new scholarly rabbinic form of himself, that there was a sense of loss, there was a sense of mourning about what he was giving up. And I think the final piece I just want to throw out here, and then I want to put this in a larger context, is I also love the delightful ambiguity about the end of the Gemara says that it turns him into a Gavra Rabbah, which is, it can either mean like a great man, like physically great, right? I mean, that's like a gibor, but it also means, or a great man. And so there's like a little wink here, I think, that says, again, maybe in contradistinction to what was pop culture in the early rabbinic period, but also counter to what is pop culture today, which is that to become a great person or a great man, manliness is about physical strength. And with a little wink, it says the way you become a great rabbinic person is through wisdom and learning and not physicality, right? And that you become more of a Rabbi Yochanan. If these are, I don't mean to keep this all on the side of kind of masculinity, but it is deeply inverting the notions of masculinity, that the way that you are powerful and great is through learning, which saps you of your strength. And you have to make a choice. You can either be kind of a great athlete or a great Torah scholar, right? And I think, yeah, what were you going to say, Shani?
No, I was just going to say, I think the gender piece is really interesting, given that Torah is referred to in the feminine, right? Maybe a subversive reading of this is actually to become wiser, to become more learned. You actually have to feminize yourself as a man, which would be one interesting way to sort of see gender play out. That there's sort of, I think you're right about the sort of wink here, right? The Gavra Rabbah, the Gever, somehow like the man actually has to spend less time focused on physicality and become a more sort of feminine person like Rabbi Yochanan.
It made me think of some of the imagery, like in Kabbalah, for example, where femininity and the feminine is often depicted as something that is receiving. It's like the field, but that is actually, to be in a receiving modality is actually a very important thing. If you want to acquire wisdom and learn, there has to be an openness, right? And again, I'm not saying that is what femininity should be today. I don't think we're anywhere in the area of trying to prescribe what gender norms should be. We're just playing with some of the gender norms encapsulated in our tradition. But I just want to say, on a personal level, this is a text that I was very attracted to. And I actually had some wish someone had shown me when I was younger, because I grew up in a kind of Midwestern high school with a very small Jewish population. And like the stereotypes of what it meant to be like a real guy in high school was all about how tall you were, how fast you were, how strong you were. And I couldn't even imagine that there was a notion out there that I didn't have to fit myself into a very narrow box of what it meant to be a real man, and to have my gender and my sexual my sex identity correspond so narrowly. And that was something that was incredibly constraining and painful. And when I first discovered this text, to say that like the notion of being gentle and learned and bookish is something that is celebrated and held up as an ideal was like very powerful for me. You can imagine like all the more so Kal v'chomer, like the kind of boxes that women get put into and how femininity is structured, yet alone the whole binary structure of gender, and there are people who just don't fit into either box very simply. So there's something very powerful about an ancient text throwing gender on its head that can be very empowering for a generation of people trying to figure out where they fit when they want to reject those simple boxes. And I also think that there was one other piece that I want to say, but I'm blanking. So let's move on to the next text, because I think we're going to be tight on time here. But let's go to slide number 3. And here we want to bring a text from a Zionist thinker named Aleph Dalet Gordon, A.D. Gordon as he's normally known. A.D. Gordon was born in 1856 and died in 1922. He made Aliyah at the age of 48 in 1904, and he was secular. He was involved in some kind of like, desk work in Europe where he lived. And he had this awakening that if all of Zionist thought was about how to make the Jews normal, and that there was something kind of perverse and broken about Jews and diaspora life, and if Eliezer ben Yehuda was trying to make the Jews normal through language, and if Jabotinsky was trying to make the Jews normal through arms and through military strength, so A.D. Gordon saw the way to make the Jews normal and to fix the brokenness of our diaspora existence as by returning to nature, returning to work, and returning to bodies. And in many ways, he became like a Rebbe for the labor Zionist movement. And there are stories of labor Zionists who refused to take medication, who took their glasses off. And there are stories about David Ben-Gurion where he believed if he didn't wear his glasses, he could actually break his weak diaspora eyes and rebuild them anew. And so this is A.D. Gordon. And Shani and I want to play with this text, both in counter-distinction to the Gemara text, but also just as like, it's almost a religious text on its own. So now that I introduced this, I feel strange calling on you to read again, Shani, but do you want to call on me to read some?
Mike, would you care to read for us, please?
Okay, so I'll read a bit and then you can take over. But and Shani, maybe just stop me as we go if there are things that you want to point out, right? But here he says, "Oh, when, oh man, will you return to nature? On that day, your eyes will be open. Your gaze will, you will gaze straight into the eyes of nature, and in its mirror, you will see your own image. You will know that you have returned to yourself, and that when you hid from nature, you hid from yourself. When you return, you will see that from you, from your hands, from your feet, from your body, and from your soul, heavy, hard, oppressive fragments will fall, and you will begin to stand erect, upright. You will understand that these were fragments of the shell into which you had shrunk in the bewilderment of your heart, and out of which you had finally emerged. On that day, you will know that your former life did not befit you, that you must renew all things, your food, your drink, your dress, your home, your manner of work, and your mode of study, everything. A different life, a life not ready-made, a life to be experienced in preparation and creation. That life you did not know." And we're drawing here from Arthur Hertzberg's famous book, The Zionist Idea. So Shani, what jumps out to you? Why don't you teach us the text since I read
it? I'll just say you taught me this text, so I will do it together. But a few things to sort of jump out. The first is the sort of similarity of this transitional moment that we saw in the previous text, right? There's sort of like this. There's this call to sort of leave your life behind, right? Do something new, change all of that. And what's interesting is the things that he points out that he wants you to change are sort of exactly the opposite from our last text, right? We begin with sort of the material, almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the food, the drink, the dress, the home. The last thing we'll mention is sort of your mode of study. That'll be the last thing affected, whereas Rabbi Yochanan with Reish Lakish is saying, like, forget all of that other stuff. Come study with me. And I think, Mike, you pointed out something really interesting when we were learning this text is how biblical it almost sounds. When, oh man, you will return to nature. And sort of the idea that nature here, we sort of replace God or Torah or learning with nature, something more removed, but maybe no less spiritual.
Yeah, and there's the "oh man" piece, which I think in my mind call to some of the like prophetic literature, right? And I think you pointed this out to me, even the notion of tshuva here, right? Like the Arthur Hertzberg's translation here is not accidental. It's reflected in the Hebrew of A.D. Gordon also, but that there's the tshuva that Reish Lakish, and I love that you said this, Shani, I didn't think about this before. The tshuva of Reish Lakish is to turn from the body to study, and the tshuva that A.D. Gordon wants is to turn from study to the body. Total mirror images of each other, right? And I think in a lot of ways, just to push us forward a little bit, given where we're in time, if the idealized male, so we have about 5 minutes left and we'll make sure to end on the dot, but if the idealized male in the rabbinic age and in the diaspora was a man who gained their power through intellect and cleverness and learning, and that form of masculinity was more gentle, more like Yosef, as you said, Shani. So now what A.D. Gordon's pushing is a form of masculinity that maybe isn't necessarily Reish Lakish, who might have been known as, my favorite interpretation of him is as a brigand. I had to look up that word many years ago. But as a robber, right? Not necessarily a toxic form of masculinity, but like certainly much more working the land. And if you read the other texts from A.D. Gordon, you really see that he wants to break down the diaspora body and build up a strong, proud, upright, new body. And that when you think, if you see the cover of the slide, actually, if you can go to the very cover of the PowerPoint deck, to the very beginning, just flip to that, you can almost see this depiction in the images, right? Here we've got in the middle, Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof, a kind of quintessential stereotype of diaspora Judaism. A.D. Gordon is in the upper right-hand corner. Ironically, he does not look like the new Jewish man. And on the other side, you've got these very buff and brawny and dirty and smoking Israeli soldiers, right? And I remember actually as a small kid, the first time that I went to Israel, marking how different Israelis carried themselves, even Jews of Ashkenazic descent, right? I mean, part of it is there's a huge Mizrahi influx. That's why they're so much better looking and tanner than we are, right? As the Ashken normative folks on the call. But even my cousins who had the same lineage that I did and came from the same place as Germany, they carried themselves with a physical bravado that as a diaspora Jew I never had. And so in some interesting way, like A.D. Gordon is a prophet. And the question is, and I don't know, Shani, if you want to spend a little bit of time playing with this, is like, which of these forms of gendered masculinity feel more attractive to you, right? Like, and maybe we can take it out of masculinity, right? But how would you want a Jew, any Jew, or how would you want a person, if they were trying to figure out how to find power and confidence in the world, are you attracted to the idea that your power and confidence comes from your brain and your intellect and your learning? Or is it about your body and about your physicality, and how do those things intersect?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and also a little bit personal, just given that my mother actually served in the Israeli army. So it's sort of it's, you know, my and so many of my cousins, I mean, you know, women being in the army there from so early on, and sort of also given a very physically powerful image. So it's interesting, and I am very attracted to the idea of you know, returning to nature. I think that's something that you know, just in general, we're becoming more and more conscious of, this return to nature. And yet, you know, as someone with smicha, I obviously care about Torah study, and so it's, you know, there in some way. I find the A.D. Gordon text less binary in terms of gender. And yet the idea, I could never leave behind, you know, that this, where he puts study last would just never, that would never be where it falls on my list. But Mike, I'm curious for you, which of these speaks to you more?
Well, so first of all, I love the fact that even within texts that go back, you know, about 100 years and a little more, and texts that go back, you know, 1,500 years, that there's that nuanced, thoughtful people understood that nature, that gender was not simple boxes, right? And I think that's actually kind of inspiring, even with the kind of complexity of some of the Gemara text. I think for me, I'm attracted to the A.D. Gordon text because the bookishness and the softness is natural for me, right? Like it was well into my 30s before I realized I had to get up and move my body, you know, and that a strong body can be a conduit to Torah and wisdom, and you can't sit and study all day. You know, your back starts to give out if your core isn't good, right? So I'm attracted to it. And I also think that there's part of me, maybe I'll leave us with this, is that the thing I love about A.D. Gordon also is just this, we live in a life that is increasingly disconnected from nature. We're spending more time inside than humans were designed to do. And the notion of returning to it and to be involved in preparation and creation, to cook our food, to be involved in planting our food, to not just imagine that our chicken is born and he's packaged in the grocery store. There's something very attractive about it. And again, it's counterintuitive to pop culture, which says, I remember a few years ago in the New York Times, they said, like, outsource everything except what you're good at. And I actually think that we need diversity. I want to do laundry. I want to cook. I want to garden. And I want to work and teach Torah. So wishing everyone a Chag Sameach. And Shani, thank you so much for doing this with me. And it's a pleasure to see all of you, and Chag Sameach, and peace and love for all of us, and quiet and safety in the days to come.
Amen.
Thank you so much to Rabbi Mike Uram and Rabbi Shani Gross. Such an interesting unpacking of this idea of embodied Judaism, the necessity of embodied Judaism, and maybe looking at how can we achieve some balance between intellect and embodied Judaism, and just balance in our lives in general. And also the notion of teshuvah, of returning. What are you returning from? What are you returning to? Lots of great stuff to think about. And I really recommend to people downloading the source sheet, because there are more sources on it. And great luck, v'hatzlacha, with setting up a really great Pardes America. So thank you so much for being our teachers.